everybody. It's really nice to see you online. I wish we could be together in the PDO Exhibition Centre. I have fond memories of giving presentations about whales there more than 20 years ago. So it feels a little bit remote to be sitting in my office here in the Netherlands, but hopefully we'll have a chance to chat a little bit and make this more personal after the presentation. So as Gianna said, today we'll be talking about Arabian Sea humpback whales and Oman, but we'll also be talking about a few other places where I've lived and worked and been involved in research and conservation of endangered whale and dolphin populations. And hopefully some of the insights from those other places will provide us with some food for thought on how to progress whale and dolphin conservation in Oman. So we'll start with a little bit of background about why I ended up in the places that I ended up before the journey began. We'll talk about Arabian Sea humpback whales in Oman and early efforts there. We'll fly across to Borneo in Malaysia and talk a little bit endangered IRRAWADDY dolphin research and conservation there. And then we'll zoom over to the west coast of Africa and talk about Atlantic humpback dolphins, a species that's critically endangered and occurs only on the west coast of Africa. And then we'll come back to Oman and we'll think about how to tie some of the experiences in all those different places together. So before this journey began, why did I end up in Oman and why did I end up doing the things that I did? Well, I'm someone who's culturally and professionally pretty mixed up. There is no sort of clear-cut linear background to my story. I'm half Dutch and half American, so already a little bit mixed up there. I was educated mostly in the United States with a bachelor's and a master's degree in human biology and education, respectively. So that's already a bit mixed up as well. And for 10 years, I worked in the field of education in the US and Spain and the Netherlands before I took a rather radical change in career direction. And that was necessitated by a move to Oman in 1997. And after working for a couple of years at a school, we'd been doing so much diving and boating that I became really, really inspired by Oman's marine life and the whales and dolphins that we were seeing in particular. And I decided to study Oman's marine life. And one of the first jobs that I had in that capacity was working as a guide on dolphin watching tours, leaving from Marina Bandar Rauda every morning and taking people out to see the amazing spinner dolphins and common dolphins that at that time were easy to find in the hundreds just off the coast of Muscat. So that's a younger me getting all excited about starting a new career in studying whales and dolphins. And it wasn't very long into that new career that I learned about a really, really intriguing research question focusing on the humpback whales that were found off the coast of Oman and in the Arabian Sea in general. Now, some of you who've been attending ESO lectures in the past may be somewhat familiar with this story, but just in case you're not, we're going to go back to the beginning and we're going to make sure that everyone understands why the humpback whales that you see off the coast of Oman are so amazing. Anyone who knows much about humpback whales and most baleen whales knows that they normally undertake really long migrations between polar feeding grounds, polar or temperate feeding grounds, which are depicted in green on this map, and tropical breeding grounds, which are depicted in purple on this map. And these long migrations that they undertake allow them to benefit from really high levels of productivity that are associated with the cold polar or temperate waters. And so you'll see that humpback whales in the southern hemisphere typically feed around the Antarctic Peninsula between the months of December and April, the southern hemisphere summer. And they'll typically breed. They'll travel thousands of kilometers to these tropical areas where they mate, they give birth, and they nurse their young in the winter months. So in the southern hemisphere, that's between May and October. And of course, in the northern hemisphere, those seasons are reversed by 6 months. And this was sort of the accepted behavior of humpback whales all over the world, and it still is. But the presence of humpback whales in the Arabian Sea, off the coast of Oman in particular, puzzled people for a long time, because as you can see, the Arabian Sea is located well within the northern hemisphere, but without any feasible migration routes to northern feeding grounds. And so for a long time, people thought that the humpback whales that were known to occur in the Arabian Sea must be undertaking really long migrations to the Antarctic feeding grounds. However, some researchers in the 1990s decided to look at all the records of humpback whales in the Arabian Sea that existed, and they determined that there were records from almost every month of the year, and they wondered whether there might be a resident population in the Arabian Sea, and whether the really strong upwelling that occurs during the southwest monsoon in the Arabian Sea might be the mechanism that allows that to occur. How does that work? Well, you can see on this map on the left, sea surface temperatures well above 30 degrees, the kinds of temperatures that you would expect at tropical latitudes like we have in Oman. And those are the temperatures that prevail in the month of May, for example. But when the southwest monsoon, the Kharif, kicks in, it blows surface water away from the coast, and really cold, nutrient-rich water comes up to the surface to replace it. And sea surface temperatures can drop down to 15, 16, 17 degrees Celsius during the Kharif. And that creates really nutrient-rich conditions, which allow the whole food chain to kick off. You get krill, you get sardines in high quantities, and that provides a prey base for the whales. So we think that it's the Kharif that allows the whales to find both the warm sheltered waters for their nursing, calving, and mating, and the productive waters that they need for feeding right in the Arabian Sea off the coast of Oman. They can be lazy whales without having to undertake the 1,000-kilometer-long migrations that other humpback whales do. This theory was sort of clinched in the late 1990s when one of the scientists who'd been working on board an illegal Soviet whaling vessel that passed through the Arabian Sea came forward with the information that his fleet had taken hundreds of whales in the Arabian Sea between 1964 and 1966, including 242 humpback whales off the coast of Oman, Pakistan, and India. So here you can see that beaten up old whaling ship and the scientist Yuri Mikhaev, who was brave enough to come forward with the information that the Soviets had been hiding. The whales that were taken in the Arabian Sea, the humpback whales, half of them were pregnant, half of the females were pregnant. Over half had full stomachs, so they had been feeding, and they didn't have this cookie cutter scarring or the size that was typical of whales that were taken in the Antarctic in the Southern Ocean. And so his revelation really confirmed that there are resident population of humpback whales in the Arabian Sea that adhere to a northern hemisphere breeding cycle. So what did that mean for me coming to Oman in the late 1990s and changing my career to focus on whales and dolphins? Well, in 1994, there was already a volunteer research group in action. They focused primarily on helping to disentangle whales that were found tangled in fishing gear. But we worked together as a group of volunteers to conduct whatever more formal research on whales and dolphins that we could. And with this leading question of what was going on with the humpback whales in the Arabian Sea, we conducted surveys from this little beat up rib that was donated to our cause to conduct photo identification of individual whales using their dorsal fins and their tail flukes. We used crossbows to collect genetic samples. We did biopsy sampling. We had a little hydrophone that we dropped in the water to listen to their song and record it. And we covered as much of the coastline of Oman as we could to document the whales' distribution and understand how they were using the different habitats off the coast of Oman. These early efforts allowed us to map what we call the hotspots for humpback whales. And you can see that the two hotspots we identified at that time, based on the work conducted between 2000 and 2004, were the Halanya Bay and the Gulf of Mazira. We were able to generate an abundance estimate based on the photo-identified humpback whales of fewer than 100 individual whales using the coast of Oman. We also, with the genetic samples that we collected, were able to determine that the humpback whales sampled off the coast of Oman were isolated from other populations sampled in the Indian Ocean, and that they were probably the most distinct humpback whale population in the world. And all of this evidence combined was used to designate the population as endangered on the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. So we were pretty proud of ourselves at that point. We managed, without any sort of formal recognition, by begging, borrowing, stealing, a lot of support in kind from companies, formal permitting from the Ministry of Environment and Water Resources, as it was called then, but not any sort of formal framework for our research. We managed to achieve what we felt was quite a lot. And that was kind of how things were when I left Oman in 2005, because my husband had another job. And it was time for us to get on a plane and to zoom over to the island of Borneo. I had just managed to get my PhD, and I was determined to find some work in the field of whale and dolphin conservation. And so with that new PhD and a lot of networking, I looked for some partners with whom we could set up a conservation-based research program. Initially, I'd hoped to work with an NGO, and I was a little bit disappointed, to be honest, that the way things ended up working was to have the program housed at a government university in Sarawak. And so we set up the Sarawak Dolphin Project, and I thought, how's this going to work? I've never worked at a university before. We had a student who was chosen, a master's student, Cindy Peter, and we had a collaborative project that was funded by a corporate sponsor, housed at the university, and had formal collaboration through an MOU with the government department that was responsible for conservation, the Sarawak Forestry Department. I was really curious to see how this was going to work out when we set out on our first collaborative surveys. And in fact, what I learned was that having the project housed in a government university was probably the best thing that could have happened to the project. By having it housed at the university and having formal collaboration with the government agency responsible for conservation, it meant that from the start, there was a huge emphasis on capacity building. So we had hands-on training opportunities for students on the boat, for park rangers who came out with us, and we also conducted training on strandings and lots of other aspects of whale and dolphin conservation work. We conducted a lot of community outreach programs that involved school children and fishers and the wider community. And because we had this formal collaboration between industry and government and university, academia, there was really high-level buy-in for all of the findings of our research. And there were opportunities to expand the research to involve local ecotourism ventures. We were able to take on more students. We were able to add on new methods, including conducting fisheries interviews with small coastal fishing villages all up and down the coast. And this meant that our research moved beyond the purely academic. We weren't just learning about the animals where they were, but we were also learning about the threats that they faced. And we were learning how to communicate the results to the wider public. And so we were able over the years to collect valuable data on the 3 coastal cetacean species that we found there: IRRAWADDY dolphins, Indo-Pacific humpback dolphins, finless porpoises. We were able to, in the few years that I was there, see 2 students achieve their master's theses focused on these 3 species. We published 6 peer-reviewed journal articles. We presented work to the International Whaling Commission, and we were able to designate 2 important marine mammal areas under the IUCN. But probably what was most exciting about the way that that project worked, as I mentioned, is the cascading capacity building. So I mentioned Cindy to you, our first MSc student, who was really fantastic in her energy and her ability to connect with people at all different levels. She won awards at the Society for Marine Mammalogy. She became a university lecturer, and she is now responsible for training bachelor students and master students herself. And so there's this whole new wave of young, talented marine mammal researchers who are developing skills in Sarawak and who are going to be ensuring that the Sarawak Dolphin Project is really grounded in local conservation frameworks and will continue to help protect dolphins there for years to come. But all good things must come to an end. In 2012, it was time for us to leave Sarawak and to move to Africa, a whole new adventure. My own personal position there, again, was going to be something completely new and different. This time I would be working for an NGO, for WWF, and my role there was going to be much wider. I was going to be responsible for supervising turtle research and conservation teams. I was going to be responsible for putting in place a fisheries research and monitoring program, looking at both artisanal and commercial fisheries. And where I could, I was going to try and carry on with whale and dolphin conservation and research. I quickly learned that the species that was of greatest interest and conservation importance was the Atlantic humpback dolphin. It is a critically endangered species that occurs only on the west coast of Africa. Like the humpback dolphins that you see in Oman, on the Arabian Sea coast of Oman or up in Musandam, it's a species you tend to only see very close to shore in shallow waters. They're thought to be fewer than 300 throughout the species' entire range, which covers 19 countries between Angola in the south and Western Sahara in the north. But those potentially 3,000 individuals are dispersed in tiny little pockets of small isolated populations throughout their range. And in the countries, we only have confirmed records in 13 of the 19 countries where the species occurs. And where we don't have records, we don't know if it's because no one's been looking for the species or because there are true gaps in the species distribution. It's very poorly studied and we have very little information. And the species faces a range of human threats, which are the same threats that face whales and dolphins, particularly coastal species all over the world. And the number one threat for any coastal dolphin species is bycatch in fishing gear. So here you can see the type of fishing fleets that are active in West Africa. They're small motorized vessels. It's these artisanal fishing fleets that tend to present the greatest threat for coastal dolphins. They use gillnets the same way that a lot of the artisanal fishers do in Oman. These can be set with anchors in shallow waters, or they can be drifting in slightly deeper waters. And in West Africa and Central Africa, there's an additional challenge because animals that are caught in fishing nets tend to gain commercial value because their meat can be cut up and used as bait in shark fisheries or for human consumption. So this is a really, really difficult challenge to address when thinking about conservation of the species. Atlantic humpback dolphins, like humpback dolphins all over the world, are also threatened by population growth and infrastructure in the nearshore coastal environments where they're found. You can imagine these same threats are also present for humpback dolphins and humpback whales in Oman, where we have a number of ports and expanding coastal developments. And so we knew that to combat these threats in Oman, in Gabon, it would be really, really important to focus on capacity building. We needed to have local people on the ground who would be well enough trained to be able to conduct research and to engage in mitigation activities to help protect the dolphins on the ground. And I was really lucky to be working with a colleague who you see in this photo, Regis Kemakema. Regis joined the program as the supervisor for the turtle team in 2012, and very quickly he became indispensable and became the coastal and marine research assistant. And then after I left Gabon in 2015, he carried on to become the program manager for WWF and then to work for the National Parks Agency. And today, Regis is heading up the National Parks Agency's Science and Monitoring Program, and he's responsible for training whole cohorts of park rangers and staff. He organizes workshops with other government officials to help raise awareness of Atlantic humpback dolphins and their conservation needs. And he travels outside of Gabon in the region. Here, he's attending a conference in Cameroon and sharing his experience in Gabon with other researchers who work with Atlantic humpback dolphins in the region. So really, as with the experience in Sarawak, I learned through my work in Gabon the importance of capacity building and working with local scientists to ensure that research and conservation actions can be really firmly embedded in local institutions and local conservation frameworks. We are also taking this to a regional level through the formation of the Consortium for the Conservation of the Atlantic Humpback Dolphin. And this regional consortium involves researchers from 16 of the 19 countries within the species range. If you're interested in learning more, you can check out this website. We've got a lot of information about this amazing species on this website if you're interested, susatutsi.org. But how can we apply all of this in Oman? So I felt incredibly lucky over the years throughout that time that I spent in Borneo and in Africa. I was able to remain involved in the research in Oman and to travel back to Oman from time to time to take part in fieldwork or workshops. And it's been incredibly inspiring to see how much things have progressed in those years since 2005 when I left. And the main reason that they've progressed so much has been because of the formation of the Environment Society of Oman. So as I said, in those first 4 years that we were active as volunteers, we didn't have any formal status. We didn't have a means to hold a bank account in the name of our research organization. And it wasn't legal in that time to form a non-governmental organization. But in 2004, it became possible to form the Environment Society of Oman. And when it was formed, it was decided that it would be much more effective to form an environment society as opposed to a whale and dolphin society, particularly. And since the formation of the ESO, it's been possible to take the whale and dolphin research to a completely new level. So under the auspices of the ESO and driven in large part by my colleague, Andy Wilson, the team has been able to add on new methodologies and to learn more and more about the whales and their conservation needs. So through satellite tagging, here you can see a satellite tag attached to the dorsal fin of this humpback whale. The team has been able to map the whales' habitat preferences and to model their habitat preferences throughout the Arabian Sea. The satellite tagging has revealed movements along the coast of Oman of individual whales, and also revealed one female whale who was tagged in the Gulf of Masira in December 2017. She then traveled all the way to the west coast of India, the southwest tip of India, and back again to the Gulf of Masira. And that boundary movement has made it abundantly clear to conservation actors in the region that if we want to protect this population, we need to act at a regional level and not just at national levels. The team has also been conducting visual health assessment work and using drones to assess body condition. So here you can see we used photographs of we examined all the photographs ever taken of humpback whales, and we conducted a scarring assessment. We could detect these very typical scars that are left by entanglement in fishing gear, where the rope or the net marks wrap around a particular feature of the whale. We're using drones to obtain aerial footage that allows us to measure the length and width of the whale at various intervals along the whale's body that allow us to calculate body volume and body condition. And these are providing insight into the health of the whales as well as their abundance and their distribution. And what's really important is that we're starting to apply this information for use in conservation management. So some of the data we collected was used to identify important marine mammal areas. But the ESO is also providing a really, really important next step in the road toward conservation of this population. Because collecting all the information in the world is, as we saw in Sarawak and Gabon, not going to do us much good if we're not able to firmly embed what we learn in conservation management plans that can be implemented by local scientists using local conservation frameworks. So thanks to some funding made available by HSBC Bank, the ESO embarked, we started in September with a capacity building course. We've had 6 individual participants taking part in the capacity building course, which involves a mixture of classroom-based sessions on cetaceans and their biology and ecology and the methods that we use to study them. 3 of these students were able to join us during our fieldwork in the Gulf of Masira in November to put what they've learned to use and to get some hands-on training in photo identification techniques, acoustic monitoring, data entry. You can see these pictures of the team here. We've got Amar, we've got Rabab, and we've got Ida from the Environment Authority, which is also really important because her involvement is helping to ensure that the work that we're doing is going to be embedded in the formal government structures responsible for conservation management. It's also really important, in addition to training local scientists, to make sure that we effectively share what we've learned and what needs to be done to mitigate threats for a particular population of whales with the government authorities and with the industry stakeholders that have the mandate to mitigate potentially threatening activities. So again, thanks to funding from HSBC and a close collaboration with the Environment Authority, we were able to hold a workshop 2 weeks ago in Muscat that involved over 30 government stakeholders and industry stakeholders, where we were able to present what we knew about Arabian Sea humpback whales and the threats that they face, and to have a really practical session working through some of the elements that could be put into a national action plan for protection of this population. So that was a really exciting workshop to be part of. And we're hoping that the follow-up to that workshop will ensure that there'll be a national action plan in place for Arabian Sea humpback whales, and that Oman will also be prepared to participate in a regional conservation management plan along with India and Pakistan and some of the other countries that border this endangered population. So it's been really exciting to be able to embark on this journey and to be able to start and end it in Oman. I think a lot of you on this call, if you're expats living in Oman, or if you're visiting, or if you're Omani yourself, you'll have no trouble understanding why a big chunk of my heart has stayed in Oman ever since we first lived there in the early 2000s. And I'd be happy with that to take any questions from the floor and hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Gianna, for the informative and interesting presentation. So if anyone, I will actually stop recording, so you can feel free when you ask your questions.